the Supreme Court ruled that the eastern half of Oklahoma was still an Indian reservation. It's still Indian land. That Congress had never disestablished that reservation. And so since then, under our Republican Trump governor, Kevin Stitt, who claims to be Cherokee, it's been a constant fight, and especially a fight for public opinion and manipulating public opinion as well, saying that, you know, some of the old maneuvers we've seen out of past politicians, be careful going into Indian land. If something happens to you, you may not see justice. Their courts are not able to handle civil or criminal cases. And so it's been really trying to live in Oklahoma here the last few years, but especially since that McGirt decision. I'm not sure. Holly, can you read the title of your flyer? There were some topics that you had mentioned under that. I think land related to religion and some of the things that we're doing at IN.
How Native Americans are fighting the environmental crisis, changing our culture, and reconnecting us to the land.
Yeah, I like that.
Glad.
We honestly, again, this is a fight that's never ended. We still, even under federal law, and let me explain, as you all were talking about your religions and belief systems, you know, we're kind of the same way. Within the boundaries of the United States, you have some way more than 500 tribes who are federally recognized. And within those tribes, although we see our worldview is somewhat the same, you know, the earth was not ours to dominate, but to caretake. We don't see ourselves as above anything. We are a part of, I guess, what Seattle, some of you may be familiar, called the web of life. And many of you may understand that man is about the only creature you can take from that web, and the web will still survive without us. So we, with the advent of, you know, this society that we live in, corporatism that seems to rule the government these days, and our water, I don't know what the situation is in your areas. I know in the Southwest and in Oklahoma, the infrastructure is breaking down, but too, we're having problems with streams drying up. There are cities in the Southwest, Southern California, Arizona, that are going dry. We had a staff person at Indigenous Environmental Network who lived in central Mexico, and she had to move because the town she lived in ran out of water. And as I said that, it seems to me I saw a documentary on a small resort city on one of the coasts that had run out of water, and they were having to buy water. All their hotels and restaurants had to buy water at enormous prices to stay in business and keep the town going. So this is something that more people within the US and globally are facing. And Holly mentioned the pipeline in Standing Rock, North Dakota, that was in 2016. August of 2016 is when my daughter and I went up, and that lasted through the winter into February. It got good press and it got bad press. The reason that we've had to start doing that is it's gotten to the point where these big oil and gas have started not even asking before not bothering with permits, even the federal permits, and let alone not asking for or consulting with the tribe as they're legally required to do. They hardly ever do that anymore. Standing Rock was it brought a lot of attention to some of those what we call corporate and industrial occupation of Indian lands. But there are lots of, and when in my work, and please understand tonight when I speak, I'm speaking for myself. I can tell you I don't know that we have official written positions on issues, because many of our people across the 500 tribes here within the boundaries of the US, we face different situations. According to the treaties that we signed, our tribal governments are not all structured the same. For instance, in Alaska, some of, and you all will probably see through the ploy, instead of designating tribal governments, they formed some of the tribes up there into corporations, which with the advent, of mining, oil, the pipelines, all those industries, extractive industries, has pitted some of our people. So you have communities that are designated as federally recognized tribes, and you have some up there who are designated as corporations. And so we end up fighting one another. And I think some of the Catholic faiths will recognize that ploy that has been used throughout Latin America. I'm not sure what all everyone here understands. There are, some people are surprised when they hear me use the term Indian. I was born in 1956. So I use the term Indian and Indigenous peoples interchangeably, sometimes natives. I don't know that if you looked on our IEN website, and you can go there at ienearth.org. I don't know that you would even see the term Native American on our website. For one thing, from what I have understood, I don't know that historians even agree on where the term America or American comes from. From what I understand, it came from Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian explorer. So, when it was nothing new in the 70s for with the advent of American Indian movement, it was really nothing new for us to start taking back our own names for ourselves. Even some of the tribes have changed the spelling of their names. They've gone to names that they called themselves and getting rid of names that the explorers pinned on them.
Can you give us an example maybe of one or two of those?
Oh gosh, I'm sure I could.
Apache
if I wasn't,
one, aren't they?
Well, now the Apaches, all of us have names. We use those names interchangeably. There are some, I'm trying to think.
The Navajo call themselves the Diné.
The Diné, right. But still, if you go to look for Diné online, you're probably going to have to look a little before you find that. The federally recognized entity that deals with the government, and that people see when they go into the Southwest is still the Navajo Nation. Not all Navajos identify themselves as Diné. So I know it can be confusing to people on the outside. I guess my point would be, say, if someone from another planet came to Earth and tried to identify everyone in Europe as the same, that we know better than that. I think that for several reasons I've learned, I just think that we just started to take back our own identities, and I say just started, but several decades ago. And as I said, this was not a new thing with the advent of American Indian movement, though they did. A lot of our people didn't agree with their tactics, but what I was young, my folks didn't agree with their tactics, but they did, and I say this around here even, what American Indian movement did back in the 70s drew attention to not only the loss of culture and language and land, but they also drew attention to the poverty on Indian lands, due not to character flaws, but more due to legislation. And a lot of the tribes now that you see online that have the casinos in Oklahoma, we have over 100 casinos of various sizes, from huge resorts to just, little walk-in casinos that you probably wouldn't even guess was a casino. But I always say, if it hadn't been for the tactics of the American Indian movement, and by today's standards were mild, if it hadn't been for them, I say, our guys here in the suits in the casinos wouldn't have those things. I don't know that we would have the healthcare systems that we have today, and not all tribes have their own healthcare systems. As I was saying, it depends on the agreements that each tribe made as they encountered the federal government. But today, the last several years, I guess I've been involved with the Indigenous Environmental Network since about 1993. And it was just getting off the ground. They had their first meeting in Oregon in 1991. And it came from a mandate of the International Indian Treaty Council, which was a diplomatic arm of the American Indian Movement, which is now has NGO status within the United Nations. This has gone back. We had people go before, a man from the Six Nations and a group of various tribal people went to try to go before what was the League of Nations that became the United Nations, the predecessor to the UN. And they tried several times to be heard there, and just kept going back generation after generation. And after 30 years, we finally, I want to say in 2007, the US finally signed on to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, with qualifications. So there's been a lot of negotiations at the tribal levels, and just as varied and different as the way we conduct our rituals across the country, though we may have the same worldview, are the way in which not only the tribes are governed, but the way our lands are classified. So it's kind of confusing. I know it is confusing to people, how we deal with environmental issues. It has to be taken issue by issue, tribe by tribe. And then, you get down to the districts within or regions within agencies like the EPA. It can get very frustrating, and we've had many years to learn. IN, I've seen IN go from one staff person, which has always been Tom Goldtooth from the start. I know when Tom first started, he was an environmental director at Red Lake Nation in Minnesota, and he worked that as the Indigenous Environmental Network was getting developed, and he did the development work without pay. Now we're up to 20 plus staff persons. I'm not sure. We've had I had mentioned to Holly earlier that the first person on the ground that set up the teepee and the last to take her teepee down at Standing Rock, North Dakota, in the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, Joy Brown. She was a Cheyenne River Sioux. She passed away on Sunday unexpectedly. Her daughter found her Sunday evening. So we kind of in a time of mourning, but we also know that Joy, as fierce and determined as she was, would not want us to stop. I didn't know if I should reschedule tonight. And then, after I thought about it, I thought, no, Joy would want us to continue. So I guess, it depends on how much you want to know what's going on within a community. Now, right next door to you guys in North Carolina, you have a federally recognized nation in the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I think there are also a couple of state recognized tribes there, but they have no relationship with the federal government. And even that issue is sometimes contentious within our own communities as to whether a state has the status to recognize tribes. So I would advise that you take Indigenous peoples as you meet them, just like you would anyone else as individuals, and ask them. We don't mind being asked questions, especially about things that are happening in our communities. I would say when I first started doing this, my boss, Jackie Warlito, was one of the founders of the Indigenous Environmental Network. And she was a real stickler for training, and especially in nonprofit development. And we had a lot of allies, and at that point we were just trying to figure out how to join in allyship with other communities of color, and also white communities. And one thing, I guess, if you're interested in taking this further and learning more about, and on your own as individuals or a group, I guess one of the things that we always hear and try to inform other groups of is, and I'm, as much as you all, I know from your face and some of the work you've described, especially like Catholic Charities. We've done a lot of work in the past with Catholic Charities, especially in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Unitarians, we have a Unitarian congregation here in Tahlequah. I've done a lot of work and gotten a lot of support. If it hadn't been for them, I wouldn't have been able to get to Standing Rock in 2016. So I know that you all support various issues across the country. One thing, I guess, that our communities are kind of sticklers about is, and I guess it's because we've had some issues over the years, and I don't think any of it was out of malice. It just probably in a great desire to want to help. But I think one thing that we ask a lot is to ask questions. If someone wants to ask you for information and you don't readily have that information, invite one of us in. In other words, I guess in plain terms, we've asked, do not speak on our behalf. And I think a lot of groups that organize and work on social issues understand, and we wouldn't do it, for any other group. Kind of planned the party, and then we had some in early days some of those issues come up, where, you know, groups have planned the party or planned the agenda and everything, and then invited us in instead of working with us to develop an agenda. But we still need our non-Indigenous allies, as we used to say, especially 30 years ago, to kick open some of those doors and let us in. I was at an Indigenous women's gathering last month in Monterey, California, and a woman from a foundation was introduced. And they told the story that, you know, they had seen her in these big halls of these foundations, you know, with lots of money. When she would talk about our issues, there were people that didn't want to hear it and didn't want to help or put any money into it. And she was one of those people who just would not give up. And those are the kind of partners, you know, that we're looking for, because and I try to make this clear when I talk to any group. I do this work because this land and what we're seeing taking place on it nowadays, especially living on the coastline. I know in the South, because I've lived in New Orleans and I go back occasionally. I have a lot of friends along that Gulf Coast, where the chemical industries and the oil industry is just, the things they live with are just unbelievable. And anymore, it's like, you know, nobody cares. Money is the bottom line. There's no such thing anymore. I think when I grew up, as I recall, there were wealthy people then, you know, but it seems as though something has changed in that now with wealth, it's held within the hands of a very few, even here in this country. When I first started doing this work, I went to Guatemala, and as I was learning about what was going on in that country, I was shocked to learn that, you know, like 98% of the wealth was held in the hands of 2% of the population. We're not far from that, if anything, now here in this country. And all of our grandchildren have to drink water. There's no way around it. Water is life. And for all of us to survive, I think we've all got to join together and put the brakes on some of this, because I know you've seen, like in communities in Michigan, for instance, and the leadership of that city knew for years what was going on. That's not an isolated story anymore about contamination. Our earth can only, you know, as we're told, she is our mother. The earth, I tell my grandchildren, the earth is not a rock that we all just, you know, have appeared on. The earth is a living being. I know I had done this work for several years, and excuse me, one evening I was off somewhere and in a hotel room, and I had turned on the Weather Channel on cable, and this documentary was describing about wind currents, water currents, and describing how they interacted, the purpose, it was I was just fascinated. But what kept coming to mind is that's just like us. We have the same functions within our own bodies. And I think I understood better than, although I'd heard it and been brought up that way, that kind of confirmed in my mind too, that we live on a living being.
Mhm.
And some of our elders, Thomas Binyaka, was a Hopi elder, and he's not with us anymore. But he said, I didn't understand for years what he was talking about. And I had to, Oren Lyons, O-R-E-N, Lyons is spelled Lyons. He is member of the Six Nations. He is an Onondaga faith keeper, is how they describe Oren. He's another elder who can talk about these worldviews a lot better than I can. But Thomas Binyaka said that they talked about the fourth world. We were in the fourth world. And when I first heard that, my thoughts went to, as an educated Indian, the third world and poverty. But what he was talking about is how societies have arisen on Earth to high technological degrees and then destroyed themselves. Boy, I can sit and think for hours on that. But I hope that, as we're told, we're caretakers, and we respect our Mother Earth in the same way that we respect our mothers.
JoKay, I'm told that there's an Ojibwe elder who commented that the world is full of persons, some of whom are human. And of course, I would add the world is, well, in my view, the world is a person.
Yes.
If I can interrupt you, we do have a couple of questions. And somebody asked, Cheryl asked, is there anything we can do to help with making water more available? Drilling wells, whatever. Our outside groups wanted to help.
Well, gosh, I don't know that drilling wells is, in some places it may be an answer. The problem is that we're actually running out of usable water globally. And what we're trying to do at this point, at all levels, whether we're talking with the federal government, trying to negotiate that, trying to negotiate with corporations, which has just been impossible still, is to pull back on fossil fuel development. We are destroying our planet. We're destroying at a rate that, once we pass this so-called tipping point, it means that the cycles that have developed, these destructive cycles past this tipping point, are operating on their own. They've been put into such a motion that we have no control over it anymore. And that's what is concerning to me.
Is IEN do you consider yourselves a national organization, or do you primarily serve that region?
No, we're an international organization.
International, okay. So any of us could join or in some way connect on the website, look around.
We're not an organization. We do work with funding from, excuse me, philanthropy. You can go on the website and just peruse the website. We have several campaigns now. I honestly, we've added so many here lately that I don't know the exact count of our campaigns.
It's a great website. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yes. But there
Sarah
are
has put a link, by the way, in the chat box for those of you who don't have your chat box open. She's also given a link to Oren Lyon's page on Wikipedia. Excuse me, JoKay, I'm also worried about your voice.
I'm sorry.
And somebody else. Oh, there's another question too, if you get where you want to look at it. Sure. Go ahead right now. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, I'm just make yourself aware and understand that we're not all the same. A lot of us, when we go to international venues and meet with other Indigenous peoples, for instance, right now we have a delegation in Sheikh Al Sharm, Egypt.
Sharm el Sheikh, yeah.
Yeah,
COP,
and
whichever.
In Egypt right now at COP 27. We find out that, Indigenous peoples on the other side of the world are fighting some of the same corporations that we're fighting here. Understand that water knows no boundary, air knows no boundary, and to believe that your communities are protected, even though the destruction is taking place on Indigenous lands, is just not so. We're all affected by what's happening around the planet. And we have to find a way to come together and try to put the brakes, especially on fossil fuels. It starts at home, that's true. But we're at a point now, the UN just came out with another report, I believe last week, on how fast climate change is progressing and how we're at a dangerous point and nothing's being done.
So it seems like I'm hearing from you that the two most critical issues could be water and fossil fuels.
And as they relate to climate change, yes.
Yeah.
We're in a dire situation in Oklahoma, and you have to read, about how climate change develops and how they classify conditions as climate change too. I've had relatives send out on Facebook posts on different pages a Wikipedia chart of temperature ranges by decades, and I try to explain that tells people absolutely nothing, and it's not an argument against climate change, because that's not how climate change is qualified. So we've got to work to make, if each one of you, just if you look at the big picture. I know when I took 10 years off to help raise my grandchildren. And so 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, I called Tom up and I said, my grandchildren are in school now, and I just got a divorce. I need a job. And so he put me to work. And in that 10 years that I'd been gone, for the first year especially, I almost talked myself out of buying again, because the issues are just they seem so big and overwhelming. But if you just take a little piece and start to learn, another thing that we're working on is things like carbon pricing. Now you can find out about these issues online. These carbon schemes and these what these corporations are trying to pass off is net zero emissions, and the one of the things that's really frustrating to me is the way these electric vehicles are sold. Electric vehicles are not the answers. Is not the answer. Electric vehicles are just they've created another problem, because the precious metals that they have to mine create such pollution and use so much water, like fracking, millions of gallons of water to get a tiny bit. And where have they started coming to get the lithium that they need for the batteries? Indian country. We have several communities now that are fighting to keep them out. So learn about carbon pricing. You can find these on our website too. Let's see.
You've got a whole bunch of position papers there, don't you? Information
We've
packages.
got
Yeah.
called Hoodwinked in the Hothouse, and it's resist false solutions to climate change. A lot of the corporations, when you learn about this, some of the new terminology, actually they've taken old terminology, and we had a workshop on that a few months ago, and I don't have it right in front of me. There were old terminologies that we all had gotten used to, biomass, just different ones that, catchphrases that were used in the industry and that people had become familiar with in order to fight against such things, these corporations. And what they do, they go and change these words to something else. Some of the practices that they're putting out as solutions were developed as techniques to extract more oil, more metals. So it's the old shell game over again. And so we're trying hard to get people to understand these kinds of things so that when they're faced with them, they know it's trick, it's lies, and it's not going to solve anything. It sounds good, but all it does is to cause us to be confused while they pump more and dig more and mine and take and take and take and pollute more and more.
Brenda asked about a list of publications. Brenda, I'll share a link on our listserv tomorrow for that, because there's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I'll send you the names of these booklets here.
Okay.
But you can find a lot of information on a lot of topics. I guess I would just ask y'all again to understand, that we're kind of all the same across these 500 nations. And the other thing is, there are 500 nations in Mesoamerica, and even more in South America. And one thing we want people to understand at these international interviews, such as COP27, the Global South, they do not live at the same standards that the global North, the countries of the global North live. And yet they are suffering the consequences of climate change that we are creating.
Yes.
You talked about our PPE project. That's what Tom hired me in just as COVID was emerging here in the US. Now, there are certain things that a lot of people think we get free, which are lies. Free healthcare is one. What clinics some of the tribes have across the country. For one thing, President Trump invited all the tribes and made a big press deal about it. All the tribes were invited to the national stockpile to obtain what PPE supplies they needed. Well, there was nothing there to get in the first place. So we understood that the tribes were trying to hold on to PPE for their medical staff. We got that. But we also wanted to stop, because we know the history of genocide, and genocide by intentional disease spread and non-intentional. We wanted to do what we could to try to mitigate some of that. And it wasn't just an IEN project. It was a project of 8 IEN and 8 social justice and environmental groups. Global Exchange was one. And there were several others, but across the globe, that came together, did fundraising. And I just sent out another shipment last week. That first year, we went to our traditional communities. And I don't think I've been clear about that difference among our tribes. We have the tribal governments that are federally recognized and have the legal relationship with the United States. And usually the ones you see on television or in the news trying to negotiate. But we also have what we call traditional, and for lack of better terminology, religious societies. And those still operate on our traditional infrastructures that they have for thousands of years. But those are the people that we wanted to get this PPE to. Some of them and I have to give it to Tom. Like I said, I hadn't been around for 10 years, and he would give me names all across the country. And from that we'd get another name, and that's kind of how that's networking, that's organizing, that's how. But also that's kind of a traditional way that Native people just come together. But that first year we ended up, we had to take each request singly. I remember there was one of the Pueblos had asked for the bunny suits that completely cover. And those were very expensive. We had to negotiate price on those and source them out. And they needed those to do their traditional burials. They have traditional people who are raised to do that within their communities, who buried certain people within their communities. And because of COVID, that just stopped there for a while. And we were able to help them with that. We were able to help some of the clinics throughout the Navajo Nation. And to tell you some of the ways we were able to get some of those supplies into those clinics, because some of them had closed down. They also set up this kind of military style system that you had to go through to even donate something. And we were getting complaints that, hey, you need to bypass that because the donations are getting bottlenecked at the tribal level and they're not getting out into the clinics. And if you've ever been to Navajo Nation, you know, one little clinic may be 100 miles from the next. So we had to get within our networks and call friends within our traditional communities and to get things like that in. I remember one day I just sat on the phone and kept dialing the next sequential number until someone answered a phone. And it happened to be a doctor, and I shipped masks to his house so he could carry him into his clinic. So that was really interesting. It was frustrating at times, but it was really rewarding. We ended up with almost with over 250,000 masks shipped into Indian country from Alaska, the Arctic Circle, down into Brazil. So I was always told a warrior is not someone who just goes to war. When you're not at war, our people always said, you know, you're there. In the old times, warriors cut firewood, made sure the elders had water or what they needed. So that's what we try to do still. And we just shipped out, I shipped out 50,000 masks last week. And then I'm working on another shipment right now of 85,000. So we'll almost be at 500,000 by the time we were hope to lock it down.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate y'all's interest. There are, you know, a lot of ways to help. The main step is to educate yourself on a lot of these issues. And they're issues for you too, because we all have to survive this. And I encourage you to learn as much as you can and join us. Stay on the site. We do actions. October of 2021, we were at the White House, actually all over DC. It was a week of actions with our, actually they were mostly faith organizations. And they centered Indigenous issues, and they arrested 700 of us that week in different places around DC. So, you know, through your own circles, if you investigate, I'm sure you'll find that some of them were probably with us. And you can find me, JoKay Dowell, at me.com. I'm on Facebook. And I try to post as much as I can there. And the ienearth.org website. So
JoKay,
takes all of it.
Yeah, you know, I think that the biggest message I've heard from you tonight, besides the environmental piece, is about the importance of just, as I say, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? To just get in there,
Right.
and the cooperation and collaboration and building allies piece, which is really just a reflection of that whole interconnected web, isn't it?
Yes. You know,
may I interject and tell a personal story that
please
points at this. Probably 10 or 15 years ago, I was at a business conference in Las Vegas. And I love the high desert. And that land was screaming about the insult of all those people and all the wasted water in that city. And they were talking to us about how many thousands of people move to Las Vegas every year. And I'm seeing these huge fountains at the Bellagio and thinking, they're not going to be able to sustain this. The land will not sustain it. And we
Right.
mentioned it as we were driving to the airport as we were leaving. I asked the cab driver, I said, what are you going to do for water? You're already bringing it from 500 miles away in order to sustain this artificial city. And he said, oh, we'll just run the pipeline further. Well,
Yeah.
and then now you're taking someone else's water. So this is the problem. People look at this and they shrug their shoulders. They can't imagine a world without water. And yet sociology has been teaching for years that the next great wars are going to be over water.
Yes, I agree. You're
I'd
right.
like
You're
to
absolutely
ask
right.
us.
And also, Carol, when not only Las Vegas, but other desert locations with gorgeous golf courses.
Yeah.
Yes. And our tribes, we're trying to work to educate them. They've bought into the system with their big casino resorts and golf courses. And, I've started saying, because 30 years ago, the elders in this movement were saying, well, we don't want to get into any, controversial places with our tribes. We don't want to be calling them out and then I've said, especially this past year, it's time to start putting pressure on them to get right, because they should know. And we do have them. It's slow. A lot of them are trying. They get it, but the way bureaucracy is, it's very slow moving, just like any governmental system. But boy, I try to remain hopeful, and when I meet people who are engaged and involved and interested, it always gives me hope that it's not too late. But we've got to really, it's time to stop with the nice nudge, and we've got to get more. We just got to lay it out for people.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate all of you. And I could talk more on more specific. I just tried to give you a broad overview.
I think that's fine for tonight. We're about out of time, and I'm also worried about your health. We want to take good care of you too. But I'm thinking that maybe we will invite you back again in the future and tackle something more specifically. And meanwhile, you've given us a lot of resources to look at and look for ways we can be involved. And besides thanking you, I did want to take a minute and just ask us, this is an interfaith community, so we don't usually pray per se together, but could we just have a moment of silence to recognize the life of your friend Joy Braun, who passed away?
Yes, thank you.
In my tradition, we have a saying that what is remembered lives, and we remember Joy. And so
Thank you. Yes.
And I want to thank all of y'all for coming tonight. I have a feeling that if you have some burning questions that you wanted to send JoKay, that you would eventually hear back from her. And I only say eventually because I know, one, you're busy, and two, you're fighting off the bug. But she gave us her email, but I'm also happy to pass something on if y'all want to send something to me. And I think with that,
I mentioned our campaigns. We've got other campaigners that, if you want to know about some specific campaign issue, we can make that happen too.
Okay. Well,
I don't see the email, Holly. Is it in the?
And no, we didn't type it in there, but I'll do that real quick. It's JoKay, JoKay Dowell at me.com, isn't it? JoKay.
Yeah, Meetup. That's a Mac, Apple, iCloud.
It's no
Address.
doubt, no dots or anything, just JoKay Dowell.
Right.
Okay, I just
At
put it in the
Meetup.
chat. Because I know we've got some great activists in here.
Oh, I bet.
So everybody, thank you for coming. Let's see, let me turn off the record here.